Have you ever watched someone with less talent, less intelligence, less skill than you walk into a room and somehow command it? They speak and people listen. They suggest and others follow. They remain silent and the entire atmosphere shifts around them. Meanwhile, you, with all your knowledge, all your preparation, all your good intentions, fade into the background, waiting for permission to exist. What's the difference between you and them? It's not what they know. It's not even what they can do. It's something far more dangerous. They've mastered the art of psychological control. And today, you're going to learn why Niccolò Machiavelli understood this secret 5 centuries ago. In 1513, a disgraced Italian diplomat named Niccolò Machiavelli was exiled from Florence, stripped of power, and left with nothing but time to think. What he wrote during that exile would become one of the most controversial books in history, not because it was cruel, but because it was honest about how power actually works. Machiavelli didn't invent manipulation or deceit. He simply observed what successful leaders throughout history already knew, that power isn't given to the deserving, it's taken by the psychologically prepared. While others wrote about how rulers should behave, Machiavelli wrote about how they actually do behave when they win. Here's what he discovered that changes everything. Confidence isn't a personality trait you're born with or without. It's a psychological weapon that can be forged, sharpened, and wielded by anyone willing to understand its true nature. The people who control rooms, relationships, and outcomes aren't necessarily smarter or more talented. They've just learned to master their own minds first. In our world of endless self-doubt, social media comparison, and approval-seeking, Machiavelli's insights are more relevant than ever. We live in an age where people are paralyzed by overthinking, crippled by the fear of judgment, and constantly seeking validation from others. Meanwhile, those who understand psychological control, who've learned to become emotionally unreachable, rise to the top of every hierarchy. This isn't about becoming cold or cruel, it's about becoming unshakable. Because in a world full of people desperately trying to please everyone, the person who belongs to no one becomes unstoppable. The prison of approval seeking. Most people are walking around in invisible chains, and they don't even know it. Every day, you make dozens of decisions based on one terrifying question. What will they think? You soften your voice in meetings. You laugh at jokes that aren't funny. You apologize for taking up space. You hedge your statements with maybe and I think and if that makes sense. Machiavelli would have called this psychological slavery. In The Prince, he observed that rulers who constantly sought approval from their subjects were the first to be overthrown. Why? Because when you need others to validate your worth, you've already handed them your power. Think about the last time you wanted to say something important but held back. What stopped you wasn't lack of knowledge, it was fear of judgment. That fear is the invisible prison most people live in their entire lives. They become so addicted to approval that they lose the ability to act without permission. But here's the Machiavellian insight that changes everything. The moment you stop needing their approval, you start commanding their attention. When you speak without seeking validation, people listen differently. When you act without explanation, they follow differently. When you exist without apology, they respect differently. The paradox of perceived power. Machiavelli understood a cruel truth about human nature. People don't respect what they think they can control. They respect what they believe is beyond their influence. This is why the most qualified candidate doesn't always get the job, and why the smartest person in the room isn't always heard. Real power comes from becoming psychologically unreachable. Not cold or cruel, but genuinely unaffected by others' attempts to manipulate your emotions. When someone insults you, they're testing whether they can move you. When someone ignores you, they're checking whether you'll chase them. When someone praises you excessively, they're seeing if they can make you dependent on their validation. The Machiavellian mind recognizes these tests and responds with strategic indifference. You don't react emotionally, you gather information. Why are they trying to provoke you? What do they want? What weakness are they probing? This isn't about suppressing emotions. It's about choosing when and how to express them strategically. I know someone who transformed his entire career by applying this principle. He was constantly overlooked in meetings, interrupted, dismissed. Then he stopped explaining himself. He started making statements instead of suggestions. When questioned, he simply said, "That's my assessment," and fell silent. Within months, people started referring to him as intimidating, not because he was aggressive, but because he became unpredictable. The language of command. Machiavelli knew that power is often an illusion, but it's an illusion created by certainty. The way you speak doesn't just convey information, it establishes hierarchy. Most people speak like they're asking for permission to exist. Their sentences end with upward inflection, turning statements into questions. They fill silence with nervous laughter and apologetic phrases. But there's a different way to communicate, the way leaders have spoken throughout history. You speak slower, not because you don't know what to say, but because you know your words carry weight. You pause before answering, not because you don't know what to say, but because you're choosing precision over speed. You end statements with downward inflection, making every sentence sound like a conclusion rather than a proposal. When someone challenges you, you don't immediately defend or explain. You might simply say, "I see it differently," and let them sit with that. This isn't arrogance, it's the confidence that comes from knowing your thoughts don't require external validation to be valuable. The transformation happens gradually. People start listening more carefully to what you say. They stop interrupting. They begin to ask your opinion instead of assuming they can dismiss it. Not because you're louder, but because you sound like someone who expects to be heard.
The strategic use of silence and presence. In Machiavelli's time, the most powerful figures in Renaissance courts weren't always the ones who spoke most. Often it was the advisor who sat quietly, observing, calculating, speaking only when their words could shape outcomes. Silence, he understood, is not emptiness, it's potential energy. When you enter a room, you have a choice. You can rush to fill the space with words, prove your worth through explanation, seek connection through excessive friendliness. Or you can enter like you belong there. Take your time to observe and let others reveal themselves first. Most people are terrified of silence. They'll say anything to fill it, often revealing far more than they intended. But when you become comfortable with quiet moments, you gain a massive advantage. You learn who's insecure, they talk too much, who's calculating, they watch and wait like you, and who's genuinely confident, they speak when they have something meaningful to add. This doesn't mean being antisocial or mysterious for its own sake. It means becoming someone who adds value through presence, not just words. When you do speak, it matters more because you've established that you don't speak just to hear yourself. Transforming rejection into strategic intelligence. Here's where Machiavelli's insights become almost therapeutic. He teaches us to see rejection not as personal failure, but as valuable intelligence about positioning and timing. When someone rejects your ideas, dismisses your input, or overlooks your contributions, they're revealing something crucial. They don't yet recognize your value. This isn't about your worth, it's about your strategy. Maybe you approached them when they felt threatened. Maybe you offered value they weren't ready to receive. Maybe they're simply not the right audience for what you bring. The Machiavellian response isn't to chase harder or prove yourself more desperately. It's to withdraw strategically, upgrade systematically, and return when your position is stronger. You don't argue with their assessment. You make it irrelevant through your evolution. I've watched this principle transform relationships, careers, and entire life trajectories. Instead of begging for recognition, people learn to create such obvious value that recognition becomes inevitable. Instead of chasing those who reject them, they become the ones being chased. Machiavelli's genius wasn't in teaching people to be cruel. It was in showing them how to be free. Free from the exhausting need for approval. Free from the fear of rejection. Free from the prison of other people's opinions. The transformation begins the moment you realize that confidence isn't about feeling ready. It's about acting without needing permission. It's about speaking without requiring agreement. It's about existing without apology. Start small. The next time you want to soften a statement, don't. The next time you want to explain yourself unnecessarily, pause instead. The next time you feel the urge to seek approval, ask yourself, what would I do if I already had it? Because power isn't given, it's taken by those psychologically prepared to wield it. If this video shifted something in your mind, hit that like button, not for me, but as a commitment to your own transformation. Subscribe if you're ready to dive deeper into the psychological principles that separate those who lead from those who follow. And here's your homework. Share in the comments one area of your life where you've been seeking approval instead of commanding respect. What would change if you approached it like Machiavelli would? Remember, legends aren't born. They're forged through strategic thinking and unshakable self-mastery.